Why free trade is bad and fair trade is better. In the ongoing debate about globalization and trade, two terms often come to the forefront: free trade and fair trade. Free trade is hailed by many as a driving force for economic growth, but a closer look reveals deep systemic flaws that disproportionately harm vulnerable populations and economies. In contrast, fair trade offers a more balanced and ethical alternative, promoting sustainability and equity in international commerce. This article argues why free trade is problematic and why fair trade is a better option. The problems with free trade. 1. Exploitation of labor and resources. Free trade agreements often allow corporations to relocate production to countries where labor laws are lax, wages are low, and workers' rights are not adequately protected. This has led to the exploitation of labor in developing countries, where workers are forced to work long hours in unsafe conditions for minimal pay. In countries like Bangladesh and Vietnam, for instance, factories churn out products for multinational companies under inhumane conditions, contributing to the ongoing cycle of poverty and exploitation. At the same time, free trade can deplete natural resources in poorer nations. With little regulation or oversight, multinational corporations exploit local resources, such as timber, minerals, and water, at the expense of the environment and local communities. 2. Erosion of local industries. Free trade encourages competition between countries with vastly different economic conditions. Developing nations, often lacking technological advancement or infrastructure, find it hard to compete with the well-established industries of wealthier nations. This leads to the collapse of local industries, which cannot keep pace with the flood of cheaper imported goods. The influx of low-cost goods in developing nations often decimates small-scale farmers and local manufacturers, driving them out of business and exacerbating poverty. A prime example is Mexico, after the implementation of the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA. Small Mexican farmers found themselves unable to compete with subsidized U.S. corn flooding the market. As a result, many farmers were forced out of agriculture, losing their livelihoods and contributing to rural economic decline. 3. Income inequality. While free trade proponents claim that it increases overall wealth, they often ignore the reality that wealth generated by free trade is not distributed equally. Large multinational corporations and the wealthy elite reap the lion's share of the benefits, while low-wage workers, particularly in developing nations, see little improvement in their economic circumstances. Moreover, income inequality widens even within wealthier nations as industries outsource labor to lower-wage countries, causing job losses and wage stagnation domestically. In the U.S., many manufacturing jobs have been outsourced to countries with lower labor costs, leaving once thriving industrial areas, such as Detroit, economically depressed. The resulting economic dislocation has contributed to growing income inequality and declining living standards for many American workers. Why fair trade is better. 1. Promotes ethical labor practices. Fair trade aims to create more equitable trading conditions by ensuring that producers receive fair compensation for their work. This approach places a premium on ethical labor practices, requiring that companies adhere to standards that protect workers' rights, provide fair wages, and ensure safe working conditions. Unlike free trade, which often disregards labor concerns, fair trade ensures that workers are treated with dignity and respect, reducing exploitation and promoting social equity. For instance, fair trade certification requires that farmers receive a minimum price for their goods, protecting them from the volatile swings in commodity prices that are often devastating under free trade conditions. 2. Supports local economies. Fair trade prioritizes the well-being of local economies by promoting small-scale producers and sustainable farming practices. By offering fair prices and long-term trading relationships, fair trade enables local producers to invest in their communities, create jobs, and improve infrastructure. This empowerment fosters economic self-sufficiency and strengthens local economies, rather than allowing them to be overwhelmed by foreign competition. In sectors like coffee, fair trade certification has allowed small-scale farmers to compete globally without being undercut by large corporations. Farmers in countries like Ethiopia and Costa Rica have seen improvements in their livelihoods, thanks to fair trade initiatives that provide them with the economic stability to invest in their land and communities. 3. Encourages environmental sustainability. Fair trade goes beyond fair wages and safe working conditions to include environmental protections. Many fair trade organizations require producers to use sustainable farming practices that protect biodiversity, reduce carbon emissions, and prevent deforestation. Unlike the unchecked environmental exploitation often seen in free trade regimes, fair trade encourages stewardship of natural resources, ensuring that communities can rely on them for generations to come. For example, fair trade cocoa and coffee producers are incentivized to adopt organic and sustainable agricultural practices, which reduce chemical inputs and promote long-term ecological balance. 4. Reduces income inequality. By ensuring that producers receive fair compensation, fair trade helps reduce income inequality both globally and locally. It empowers marginalized communities, allowing them to benefit from global commerce without falling prey to exploitative practices. Fair trade initiatives also direct a portion of profits to community development projects, such as schools, healthcare facilities, and clean water initiatives, which further uplift communities and narrow the wealth gap. Conclusion. Free trade, while touted as a pathway to economic growth, has significant downsides that exacerbate inequality, exploit vulnerable populations, and undermine local economies. In contrast, fair trade offers a more ethical and sustainable approach to global commerce. By prioritizing worker rights, environmental sustainability, and economic fairness, fair trade promotes a more just and equitable world, allowing everyone, not just multinational corporations, to benefit from global trade. The need to shift from free trade to fair trade has never been more urgent. As consumers, businesses, and governments become more aware of the ethical implications of their choices, fair trade stands out as a better, more compassionate, and more sustainable alternative. By embracing fair trade, we can build a global economy that works for everyone, not just the privileged few.